Winter Danger by William O. Steele, Chapter 4. "Get back in the hole quick!" shouted Jared. Caje dived into the tunnel. Jared was close behind him. "You hurt bad, Caje?" he asked. Caje moved his arm. It ached some, but he reckoned it wasn't going to drop off. "It ain't more'n a briar scratch," he answered. "It's dang lucky they didn't take your head off," Jared commented, pushing past his son. "I don't know how them varmints found us. Come on." They walked forward, half stooping in the low places, and came out in the passageway which they had first come down. Jared stood a minute, hesitating, and then he started cautiously down a corridor where ferns hung from the walls in long green streamers, and moss was soft underfoot. Caje glanced down at his arm. It hurt him considerably, but it had quit bleeding. He knew Jared was peeved because the Indians had found them. Caje couldn't help thinking they'd have done better to stand the Indians off down in the valley. This place was mean. He had a feeling the rocks would be as happy to see dead white men as the Indians would be. They came to the end of the passageway, and Jared struck off over a rock covered with peeling green lichen. They trotted through a clump of big sweet gums. Caje felt easier. As he passed the trees, he touched the deeply furrowed trunks and wished Pa would stay here. But Jared hurried through the thicket, and Caje ran after him, his feet rolling about on the prickly gumballs lying thick on the ground. They climbed the big gray rocks, jumping back and forth until they reached a wide, level stretch of limestone with scattered patches of dead grass. They crossed this and jumped a crevice to another slab of rock. "If I live, I'll never climb another rock, can I help it," Caje told himself. He began to slide down a slope, holding his rifle up in both hands to keep it from bumping and scraping. An arrow smacked the rock at Cage's feet and glanced off into the rocks below. He flinched, but he slid on down to the bottom. Jared leaped off the rock and turned with his rifle raised toward the bushes on the cliff behind them. "Come along afore you get hit again," he ordered. Another arrow hit near them, and Jared swore. Caje jumped down beside his father, and they began to run close to the rocks. They rounded a boulder, and Jared put out an arm to stop Caje. A little in front of them, two Indians searched among the rocks, one stopping to peer down a passageway. Softly, the man and the boy backed away. Jared paused to listen. To their left, there was the faint scuff of moccasins on stone. Then a rock rolled. And suddenly, there was the most terrible uproar Caje reckoned he'd ever heard in his life. It made his blood turn to ice in his veins. Through the gray winter afternoon rang the terrible sounds of the war whoop, caught among the rocks and tunnels. It echoed and re-echoed from boulder to boulder and thundered all around them. Caje was half frozen with fear. He couldn't tell where the sound was coming from. "They seen us! Run!" yelled Jared, and sped off among the jumbled rocks. Caje forgot how his legs ached and his arms stung. He raced ahead like a black snake in the springtime, bounding among the rocks, ducking and twisting close behind his paw. An arrow sang over his shoulder, and bullets sent pebbles leaping around his ankles. A boulder hid them for a minute, but then they were out in the open again, and there was the angry spattering of lead on the rocks around them. They dodged this way and that. Suddenly they burst out on a narrow ledge on the side of a cliff so sheer it made Cage's head swim to look down it onto a tumble of rocks. He jumped back from the edge, hugging the wall. Far below, the river wound peacefully through the yellow meadow. "Dang, they got us for a fact," Jared said. He looked up at the cliff, rising high and smooth over their heads. Then he began to pick his way easily along the shelf of rock. Caje followed more slowly, searching for cracks to hold by and trying not to slip on a loose stone that could roll under his foot and send him flying out into space. Jared walked on, not looking back. He could follow a ledge to the end of the world and never stop to reckon but what Caje was following, Caje told himself bitterly. There was a shot behind him. Caje stopped, swaying with fright, and found another crack in the cliff to hold to. He looked back along the ledge and saw an Indian raise his rifle. As fast as he dared, he scuttled along the cliff toward his father, who was standing where a bulge in the cliff face gave a little shelter from the Indian's fire. "We can't go no further. This shelf quits right here," Jared spoke over his shoulder. Caje glanced ahead. It was true. The ledge broke off in front of Jared, and the unbroken cliff fell straight to the rocks below. They would have to hang there the rest of the day and through the night if the Chickamaugas didn't knock them off first, Caje told himself. Jared turned and said, "I'm going around you." Caje pressed himself against the wall, trying to make room for his father on the narrow ledge. He reckoned there wasn't enough room left for a chigger to crawl over, but Jared stepped past him easily. Jared fumbled inside his shirt a moment, then handed Caje a leather thong. "Tie your rifle to your back. Yonder's grapevines. We'll have to slide down that one that's close. It's chancy, but it ain't as chancy as waiting here for them redskins to shoot us. I'll hold 'em off while you go down." Caje looked and saw a vine as thick as his paw's wrist dangling down the cliff from the rocks above. He leaned out a little, but he couldn't tell if the vine went all the way to the bottom. Caje tied the thong to his gun and slung the rifle over his head. Now both hands were free. He stepped out to the very end of the ledge. The grapevine lay just beyond. He eyed it a minute. Was it wrapped around a tree above, or was it lying, coiled along the ground, so that when a body took hold of it and swung out into space, it would come loose and send him crashing onto the sharp, jagged rocks below? Jared's gun roared. As he began to load, he said sharply, "Go on, Caje. We ain't got from now till spring." Caje steadied himself and reached out for the vine, clutching a crack in the rock wall with his other hand. He stretched forward a little bit more, but still the vine swung just out of reach. He drew back and wiped his sweaty hand across the front of his shirt. He dug his fingers into the wall split. Once more, he leaned out for the vine. A lead ball whined past him. He swallowed and shifted his feet. Just a little more, a few more inches, and he could grasp the vine. Carefully, slowly he edged forward into space. He was almost there. The vine touched the very tips of his fingers, but he could not grab it. His arms weren't long enough. He took a deep breath and lunged. His fingers left the crack in the rock. For one wild moment he was falling. Then his hands closed round the vine. He clutched it, gripped it with both hands, and hung there, his legs swinging below him. "I made it," he told himself triumphantly. But the vine gave under his weight, and he dropped through space with sickening speed. "I'm a gone gosling now," he thought desperately, and suddenly the vine pulled taut, half shaking him loose. He hung there, swaying like a leaf in the wind, bumping against the cliff. Then he wrapped his legs around the rough vine and began to lower himself, hand over hand, as fast as he could. Down, down he went, until he figured he must be close to the ground. He looked down, but it was a foolish thing to do. It made his heart come up in his mouth to see the long way he still had to go and the sharp rocks waiting for him. He slid faster. The vine slithered through his hands, burning like fire. His wounded arm was beginning to ache. He squeezed the vine with his legs, and that slowed him down some. Still, he knew he couldn't grip the strand much longer. His fingers were weak, and each time he lowered himself, it was harder to get a firm hold. Then his feet touched the earth, and Caje fell in a heap on the ground. He'd done it. He'd got clean away from the Chickamaugas. But the firing on the cliff was still going on. Caje stumbled off through the rocks away from the cliff. He yelled up at Jared and saw his father reach out for the vine. The Indians fired, but Jared never heeded. He grabbed the vine and started down. Caje watched him, wondering if the vine would hold. His paw was a heap heavier than he was. Jared had stuck his long rifle under his belt, and Caje could see it was in his way, but he came down fast. The vine would hold all right. Caje glanced back to the ledge and yelled in surprise and fear. A brave crept toward the vine, holding his tomahawk in his hand. It would take but one chop of that axe to cut the strand. Caje raised his rifle, but his arms were too weak and tired. He couldn't hold the gun steady. He ran over to a small sapling and rested his rifle in a fork of the tree. He sighted hastily up at the Indian sidling along the ledge. The brave had reached the vine now. He leaned toward it and raised his tomahawk. Caje eased his finger back against the trigger. There was a flash and a roar. Caje lowered his rifle and squinted up. The tomahawk fell from the Indian's hand as the red man teetered on the cliffside. He half turned, throwing his arms wide, and then he fell, spinning over and over. A long, wailing shriek echoed out over the valley and was cut abruptly short. It was quiet on the mountainside where the cold, blue twilight lay among the rocks. Caje turned away and looked down the slope to the valley, full of black shadows. The day was over. "That was a pretty shot," Jared said beside him. Caje hadn't heard him come up. "It was just luck," he answered without even looking up. It didn't matter. "I reckon that's the last we'll see of 'em," Jared went on, staring up the cliff. "The 2 I killed and the one you hit from here makes 3. They'll take Poplar and shove off now." He spat among the rocks. "I made sure they had us out on that shelf." He grinned a little. "It was a fair fight, though." Caje stared at his father. He liked it, he thought. He likes to fight, and the nearer he comes to getting killed, the better he likes it. They followed the cliff until they came to a little spring. They knelt and drank. Jared sat up, wiping his mouth. "We might as well settle here for the night," he said. "All right," Caje answered. This would do as well as any spot, he reckoned. "Here," his father took his arm. "Let me see that." He found a puffball and dusted the dried powdery inside on the wound and bound it with a strip of tow he used for patches for his rifle. "It was a good fight. You did well, Caje. I'd about as soon as have you along with me as Josiah Skaggs," he said. "You're as handy with a rifle as any boy your age I ever saw." He dropped Cage's arm and said harshly, "But you followed me too close half the time. Didn't leave yourself good room to use your rifle." They stretched out among the rocks with dead leaves over them, and Caje tried to sleep. But it was cold. His arm burned, and he couldn't get his tired body to lie easy. It seemed like his legs had been running so long they must needs go on running and climbing even when he was half asleep. He kept seeing the Indian's body plunge down through the air, and he went over and over what his father had said to him about being almost as good to have along as Josiah Skaggs. A body had to do what came along as best he could. But it was a crying shame if Caje Amis had to be good for nothing but a woodsy all his life. To live in the forests and hunt and trap, to carry his furs to the trader and swap them off for just so much powder and lead as the trader was willing to give, so that all he could do was turn around and go back to the woods for more skins. It was a hard way to live, and a harder way to die, of cold and starvation, and at the hands of the savages or the jaws of beasts. Suddenly, Caje struck his fist on the rock. Was he going to have to be a woodsy all his life? In the morning, Jared woke him as soon as it was light. Caje groaned to himself. He felt as if he'd been beaten. He was so sore and tired. They didn't even stop to drink, but set off down the mountain after their packs. They found the bundles where Jared had hidden them. Caje opened his and took out what was left of the deer meat and ate it, even though Jared was impatient and kept saying he'd shoot something for them to eat before noon. As he crouched on the rocks, chewing the strips of half-smoked meat, he looked up suddenly at his father. "What's that?" he asked. Jared was listening too. "Is it Injuns?" whispered Caje. "I don't know what it is," Jared answered. "It ain't like anything I ever heard before."